I'd like to welcome everyone to this exciting event. It's the Reclaiming Pride panel about how we can divest from genocide, both reflecting on what happened last year as well as what's happening this year and what could happen this year. So the event is organized by two major organizations that we'll talk about in a moment. I thought I'd just describe at the beginning one of the reasons why what is going on in Palestine is still so crucial and important for queer people, trans people, and gender diverse people around the world. What we're actually seeing is that even though there's now a so-called ceasefire that's been declared in both Lebanon and in Gaza, what you're actually seeing is the continuing murder of Palestinians. More than 130, is my understanding, have been killed in Gaza since the actual ceasefire was declared. Humanitarian and other types of devices, including equipment to get rid of the rubble, has actually been denied access to Gaza by the Israeli forces. And of course, what we're seeing is an escalation of the campaign against Palestinians on the West Bank, especially in the Jenin area. And the final thing is you're also seeing the same thing happening in southern Lebanon, where people are being systematically killed, houses are still being destroyed. So what we're actually seeing is the ceasefire does not end the genocide. It actually becomes a new vehicle for the genocide against the Palestinian people going forward. And of course, that includes Palestinian queer, trans, and gender diverse people. And it includes all the same reasons why we tried to get Pride organizations last year to no longer have the same corporate genocide sponsors that they've had up until that point in time. So we're really looking forward to a discussion that both reflects on what happened last year, but also reflects on what could happen this year in terms of the organizing of queer, trans, and gender diverse communities, including queer, trans, and gender diverse Palestinians and other racialized people and indigenous people, to actually end the corporate genocide alliance that has been so common to what various different pride groups, especially the larger, more corporate ones, have been organized around. So we are sponsored by two major organizations. May will talk in a moment about Queers for Palestine Toronto and the campaign that we're involved in to try and get as many pride committees to support the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaign as possible. But we're also very pleased that today one of the major supporters of the event is Scholars Strike Canada. Now, Beverly Bain, one of the coordinators of Scholars Strike Canada, describes it as an activist virtual platform launched in 2020 to support the Black uprising against police violence and in support of the abolition of police and prisons. It has continued over the years to launch multiple labor actions against oppressive and repressive academic policies and practices in support of queer and trans rights, against Islamophobia, against the attacks on Indigenous communities, against the arrest of Indigenous land defenders, and most recently in support of Palestine and against Israel's continued genocide of Palestinians. Just to reiterate why many of these issues are still important, Palestine solidarity activist Eve Engler, who lives in Montreal, has actually been arrested by the police today and is in jail tonight because he actually has made social media critiques of both Zionists who support genocide, but also the police. So there's a whole bunch of struggles going on. So that just sort of is a little bit of an introduction, and I'll now introduce May, who will be talking for Queers for Palestine Toronto about our campaigns and also about the organization that we are.
Thank you, Gary. I think Gary did a really great job of contextualizing why this is really important. And I think more than ever right now, what we need is sustained action that has impacts. Speaking as a queer Palestinian, this movement is it's not a trend. It's not something new. It's not it's been ongoing for a very, very long time. And I think it's really important that we those of us in the diaspora and those of you that are allied with our movement are thinking through these creative ways to create that sustained activism um, to work towards the liberation of Palestine. So I was really honored to be asked to co-moderate with Gary today. And just to give you a bit of background on who Queers for Palestine Toronto is, it's an anti-Zionist coalition of queer and trans people based in Toronto who work in solidarity with the Palestinian liberation movement. It was formed in 2023 following the accelerated genocide in Gaza, but I want to say that it's made up of a lot of folks that have been doing this work for a long time. So it's great that there's the work didn't start in 2023, but that's when Queers for Palestine Toronto was formed. And Queers for Palestine aims to enact the liberatory demand from queers in Palestine. Some of you may have seen the statement that was circulated by queers in Palestine. They had called for a permanent and actualized ceasefire, an end to the siege of Gaza, and the liberation of all of Palestine from the river to the sea. And for Queers for Palestine Toronto too, it's particularly important to add to those demands that we demand an end to the Canadian financial, military, diplomatic, and political support for so-called Israel, that we are really working here to end that complicity in the accelerated genocide and the oppression of Palestinians from the river to the sea. The Palestine Solidarity Pride campaign, so the PSP campaign that we're really going to be talking about today, that was launched in December of 2024. And it's asking Pride organizations to adopt the publicly available and ethical sponsorship policy and to abide by the guidelines of the cultural boycott of Israel by the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions National Committee, sometimes called the BDS movement. And in doing so, to adhere to that, to not accept sponsorship or partnership from companies that are on the BDS list, not to accept sponsorship or partnership from arms companies, and to not accept sponsorship or partnership with financial institutions funding arms companies or participating in the ongoing colonization of Palestine. So that gives you a bit of context to what we're going to be talking about today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get to the speakers who are going to have some really important information to share from their experiences organizing coast to coast in their particular locales. We do have a chat function that's open right now, so you can, as things come up for you, if a speaker has said something particularly resonant or that you want to ask more about, please drop the question in the chat. We have folks that will be monitoring the chat for questions, and if time is available at the end, we hope to get to as many of those questions as possible during the Q&A portion. And Gary, unless there's anything you want to add, we can get right into our wonderful panelists.
I would say go for it.
All right. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce Kai. Kai is a trans-Palestinian MA student at the University of Toronto's Geography Department. They are an activist, storyteller, and a lover of archives. And they're going to speak to us a bit about why supporting BDS is so important. Thank you, Kai.
Thank you, May, and thank you everyone for having me. It's an honor to keep showing up on this platform to talk about the what's happening here on a scale of a city of Toronto and on the scale of a nation and the scale of like the whole global movement right now. And I would say we saw in the last year how the BDS movement was one of the crucial keys to really pressure the big companies and pressure policymakers to actually do actual changes that is I would not say stopping, but at least doing something even on a very small scale in what's happening in Gaza and West Bank and Palestine in general. So I'm being told to be more like a freestyle or not, but I know that as a Palestinian myself, I shared always the same story, but um, as a Palestinian, as a queer, there was always a sense of being isolated before October 2023. Then eventually I started to see kufiyas everywhere and I started to see the queers everywhere. And I think after a year, we are the most active category of comrades on the scene right now. And that's something I'm very proud of. Also, what we did in summer in Pride Toronto was amazing from everyone, whatever was our style, whatever the way we chose to express ourselves. Okay. Sorry, I got distracted. So yeah, why it's important to support the BDS as a queer yourself, because we are always being targeted as a commercial machine maker for the economy. Whatever there are queer events or queer brands, they will increase the prices just for us because they know that we will buy it. And there are a lot within the queer community here in Toronto that we can boycott behind other stuff that might not be important for other categories in our community. We have like the most important thing is the Pride and Pride Toronto in particular. I know last year we chose a lot of styles between canaving and like doing direct action or just walking around and try to lead the crowd with a megaphone. But I'm pretty sure behind that there is a big connection between the prides in around the world and banking and the bank system happening. So I think I saw so many of us in just like withdrawing funds from the bank we are associated with. So that's a part of it. I know some medical companies in the pharma that provide particular products for the queer community, also on the BDS list. So we can always ask our doctor to change the prescription or something. I know I'm giving very general tips, but all what I need to know, I usually come as the person who like cheer everyone up, but maybe not today. Maybe today as queers, we need just to stay in the sumud, in the steadfastness that we are, in the as a queers, like we've been fighting for a long time for so many issues. So just keep up the work, and it's a long battle. Yeah, I mean, as a Palestinian, as a queer, I also had a lot of conflicted emotions about being part of the Pride or not, but my choice was to lead the crowd with a megaphone. So if you want to change from inside or without from the outside, it's on you. And yeah, there will be amazing speakers after me, and I'm really honored to be here listening to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kai. Thanks again, Kai and Gary. I think we'll be introducing our next speakers.
Yes. So thanks, Kai. Thanks, May, for all of the introductory information. One of the first places that ruptured with the corporate support for genocide at Pride was St. John's Pride. And we have with us the co-chair external for St. John's Pride, Eddie St. Cour. And I'll just read a brief description of Eddie, and Eddie's going to then tell us what actually happened in St. John's last year. Over the last 3 years, this is Eddie, he's worked with an ever-dedicated board and a more engaged community who continually work together in the spirit of unity and solidarity. He is driven by the progress he's seen in his local community and the team he's been able to be part of in working through uniquely local issues, as well as national issues in a local context. He works as a consultant, and he lives with his partner Craig and 2 dogs in a house so gay they painted the whole thing purple so queer people in the neighborhood know that they're not alone. So I just wanted to introduce Eddie to talk to us about what happened last year with St. John's Pride and why you decided, your group decided to actually give money back to the TD Bank and to rupture these relationships with genocide supporting sponsors. Go ahead,
Awesome.
Eddie.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. And yeah, I'm really happy that I was asked to be here today, that I can be part of hearing what happened in different cities and to kind of share our experience, because I think it's important to talk about it. So a couple of years ago, like many Pride organizations do, ours went through a full collapse. And then a team of us kind of stepped in to try and catch it, to make sure that there was a festival and a Pride parade happened. And one of the things that we were trying to do in that is to rebuild trust within our community for what our local Pride organization was doing. And somebody from our board had been seeing the activism that was happening with our local Palestine Action YYT group. YYT is the airport code for St. John's. That's why they picked that name. And suggested, maybe this is something that we should be looking at. So I started going to the rallies and looking around. And what I noticed was that we could see a lot of our community in those spaces. We saw a lot of queer people. We saw a lot of activists that were familiar with us. And we started to realize that there's a big overlap in the Venn diagram when it comes to the queer community and support for Palestinian people. And we went through this discussion, and we approached Palestine Action YYT, and we said, listen, we think what you're doing is really great. We think it's really important. And we asked them, would you be interested in being the grand marshals for the parade? And us being a benign group to it all, and really kind of going into the whole notion blind, we thought that was going to be great. And there's not a whole lot of people that are tuned into, weren't a lot of people here that were tuned into Palestine and St. John's. So we went back and forth, and this organization was made up of a coalition of different activist groups from the queer community who each said, there's things that we want out of our Pride organization before we can engage in good faith. So these groups put together a list, and there were BIPOC people involved. There were different activist groups that were involved, and they were kind of things that people had wanted to see out of their local Pride organization, but in past iterations, there wasn't an appetite for that. People didn't want to rock the boat, and they really lost that protest pillar kind of the organization. And we, as a current iteration, we kind of focus on 3 Ps. We focus on protest, which is the origins of the movement, the protection that comes from the community, and the party and the celebration that kind of comes all-encompassing of what a Pride festival is. So we looked at this list of things that was put forward, and this group came to us in earnest and said, we know this is a lot to ask all at once. There's only a couple of weeks to the festival. I think this was June the 19th. Our festival started on July the 9th. And we as a board looked at it and said, no, these are all fair requests, and they're all things that we want to see from our Pride organization. So we accepted them all, and we started the process. That activist group has since come to us and said, we didn't think you'd actually say yes to all of it. They were quite surprised that they saw us lean into what they were doing. And we started reaching out to our sponsors and partners in different groups, and said that we had made this decision, and we had offered to guide them through the discussion and however they kind of went. When we looked at the finance side of thing, we realized that there were a lot of organizations, TD Bank's a great example, that were really branding themselves across the country as the gay supporter, that they were really big supporters in the village, and that gay people love TD Bank loves gay people. And then we started to dig into what their sponsorship was. I think they gave St. John's $5,000, which for some pride organizations is a lot of money. For a capital city in the country, not really that much, especially when you look at what they were giving out in different cities, different cities where they were having bigger marketing reach, for lack of a better word. It was marketing driven, not so much driven to support the community and make sure that things advanced. So when we realized kind of the disparity of what groups like TD were getting, it made the decision easier. And it also, for us, it put us in a situation where we weren't actually that dependent on their funds. Like our festival is a $120,000 festival, and it's grown to that. That's probably the biggest that it's ever been. So we started going through the process and saying, no, take the money back. We started sending checks back and sending the money back and saying, you know what, financially we'll be okay. But so long as you folks are doing this, so long as you are on one side of the world saying that you're a really gay supportive organization, and then on the other side of the world attacking the very right to exist, as we're seeing in Palestine by funding weapons of war and those kinds of things. And we said, no, we can't do it. For the most part, I think that at the start things kind of went well. I don't think that a lot of these brands were expecting us to take such a strong hardline stance on it. And we also saw Fredericton at the time. Fredericton had actually put their announcement out, I think 3 days for us. They beat us by this much. But we felt comfort seeing that in other Atlantic Canadian prides. Where we really didn't expect a lot of the backlash was one of the groups that is on our local BDS list is PepsiCo. Pepsi in our part of the country is produced by a local franchisee, and they're what we would describe in Newfoundland as a merchant family, long legacy family that's been operating in the city for, I'd say, well over 100 years. Gary, you're the historian. Correct me if I'm wrong there. You used to live here. And these groups don't like to get pushback from anybody. They're very much used to supporting organizations, and that's not to, they do a lot of support in the community, but they weren't ready for a group of volunteers like us to say, no, we're sorry, because of what PepsiCo is doing with the brand that you make all your money off of, because of what they're doing in other parts of the world that fundamentally go against our rights as queer people. We can't allow you brand positioning. And we had worked in earnest with this organization to say, we know you have a longstanding relationship. We've got a lot of comms people that support our organization here. We're willing to kind of help you navigate this discussion. And the long and short of it was no, instead they decided to not just take their $3,500 that they donated to the Pride organization and made it seem like they were huge financial stakeholders. They were going to take that money along with thousands of more dollars, and overnight hired the largest independent PR firm in Atlantic Canada. And I know that stat because I used to work for that PR firm. And I woke up Thursday morning, I was quite literally thrown under the Pepsi bus. They were on every news outlet in the city, print, radio, TV, you name it. This organization had paid good money overnight to go out there and essentially equate supporting our organization and our movement with being un-Newfoundland. How could anybody turn their backs against Pepsi? And there's a lot of historical culture behind that and why that's really ingrained in people here. But these people showed us that they showed us really where their importance was. Luckily, I just resigned from my position a couple of weeks earlier, so I had all the time in the world to do the media and to kind of work through this and to lean on the support that I had from my Pride organization to kind of get through that discussion. But it was really indicative of what their intentions were and what they were really supporting. Where things got even more tangly was that production company is also backed by an organized labor group, and the labor group turned to the same page of the playbook as the employer, which was really scary because it's not what I come from the labor movement. I used to do work with the NDP in politics. I take a lot of the steps that I take in life from things that I learned from the labor movement. And I knew that one of the tenets was that pride and labor go hand in hand, and they do for a lot of good reasons. But when I saw labor turn to the same page of the playbook as the employer, I knew something was going to go wrong. And it turned into that labor organization pushing at the Federation of Labor to pull all support for the Pride Festival, and it caused conversations across the country with the Canadian Labour Congress because people in labor were seeing this schism happen and people didn't know what to do with it. Luckily, we ended up having the largest parade and the largest festival that we've ever seen in the city. And I was walking through our Pride in the Park event at the end of it, and one of the advisors for the Premier's office was walking beside me, and she said, how's everything going? And I quite literally gestured broadly at the thousands of people that were gathered in the park just across the street from my house and said, we did the right thing, and I'm gonna sleep fine tonight. And it just goes to show that by not shying away from that protest side and making sure that you're connected to your local organization and what your local community is doing and what they're calling for, it's not as scary as it was because we were on the opposite side of the conversation. Instead of our pride parade getting stopped, our pride parade grew. And not because we were geniuses. We quite literally fell into it. But if there's one message that I can send out to people and anybody that's listening, it's don't be afraid to lean in and listen to what especially young activists are doing in your local queer community, because I think that they've got their finger on the pulse for a lot of things. And don't be afraid if you're in the position to take those stances and make sure that your organization stands for something and recognize that it's a privilege to be a part of a Pride organization and to support a Pride organization and set standards for those groups that are participating. And that's something that we're still working through. We still have a lot of work on policies and that and how we define those things. But overall, leaning into our community and supporting the movement in Palestine was a great experience as much as it was challenging. And I think overall, we have a lot more respect in the community as a Pride organization because of it.
Thank you, Eddie. I really appreciate you talking through some of that backlash and the struggle, but also thinking through how that, like you say, grew the movement or how it was responsive to the community despite what the response from some of these corporate sponsors and their supporters was. So to be able to take that brave stand and see that actually you have a lot of support behind you despite the backlash. So thank you for speaking to that. Going to introduce our next speaker, who is Cam, joining us from Pride PEI. Hi, Cam. Cam is a Prince Edward Island-based arts creator, affordable housing advocate, and the executive director of Pride PEI. She's grateful to share this space with all of you today, and we are grateful to have you here today. Pride PEI is a small nonprofit organization whose dream is to create a world where everyone in the queer, rainbow, 2S LGBTQIA+ community lives openly and authentically, free from all forms of oppression, harassment, and discrimination. They envision a vibrant, Abegwit, I hope I said that correct, PEI, a place rooted in love, respect, and solidarity, where all can thrive and contribute to a brighter, more just future in which diversity is celebrated and equity is the norm. So thank you, Cam, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thanks everyone for having me. As May mentioned, I am from Pride PEI, and we are located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, Epiquet, and so I'm very grateful to be here. And some context for Pride PEI really that I think is really important in this whole conversation is that we are the smallest province. Our organization actually has a mandate that supports the entire province. We're not just regional or for a city. We have a mandate to provide for the entire province, and we are only 179,000 people on the entire island. So very small, and I think that will play into kind of as I talk a little bit more about our experience and the work that we did. So we actually have been talking for a number of years within our organization about the involvement of particularly large corporate banks, political parties, large corporations generally. So this has been an ongoing topic within our board and also our community for a number of years. And this year, sorry, I should go back last year, the 2023 festival, we actually did make a statement and we did not allow political parties to march in our parade. And that kind of started a really interesting shift in mindset of our local community. As a really small rural community, PEI is rural at its core. That didn't necessarily come easy because we are dealing with a lot of folks who are very stuck in the PEI way, the islander way of living and existing. So this year, we were really in tune. A lot of our board and our staff were very in tune with the, what was happening in terms of local local movements and the movement towards BDS for the Palestinian community. And we were really connected to that. And that felt really important for us to acknowledge. So as we started getting closer and closer to the festival, we really saw an opportunity for us to speak up and say something and say it very loudly. And we did just that. So we made a public statement about 3 weeks-ish, perhaps, before our festival. And that public statement included everything from we did not accept any funds or participation from large corporate banks. That included not accepting the $2,000 that TD Bank has historically offered the organization. So we did not accept that or from any other corporate bank, and they were not allowed to participate in our parade or in any other aspect of the festival. On that note, we also donated merch funds to a Palestinian family. We assured that we were saying that upright, and we actually were able to create some merch with the watermelon emblem and assure that those funds went towards a cause that was meaningful to us. We also did not Again, this year, we didn't accept any parade requests from political parties. There was some confusion amongst our community. People were saying, well, why can't politicians march? What if, so-and-so, that individual wants to march? And we said that individual can march. The political party can absolutely not march. So we did not have any presence from political parties in our parade. And we also did not have presence from political parties in any other aspect of our festival. Whether or not it was connected to us saying no, who knows? But, we were kind of happy to actually see that we didn't have any of that present. And then similar to St. John's Pride, we had PEI for Palestine actually lead our parade. And they were heavily involved in other aspects of our festival as well. So they were in attendance at our kickoff and led the parade with us alongside the PEI Transgender Network. And we led the parade with chants, pro-Palestinian chants to really assure that our voice was being heard. So in terms of this year, I hope that we can continue to do all of these amazing things. And I hope that, folks who might be out there listening are able to hear some of the simple things to us that felt so small and so easy to do, to stand up and do the right thing. And I know it can feel challenging, but it's the least that we as an organization can do. So I hope that we continue to grow our knowledge and understanding of how we can better support. And I hope that, you folks all enjoyed learning a bit about what we did at Pride PEI this past year.
Thank you, Cam. I really loved what you said about some of the simple things, because maybe really it is as simple as in you're showing through your experience as creating a pride that just isn't captured by corporate interests, right? Because as we know, those interests align then with colonial interests both here and abroad. It really is that simple sometimes. So thank you so much, Cam.
Thank you.
Gary, over to you to introduce our next speaker.
Sorry, I'm sorry about the Zoom problem I just had. The other thing we have, which is just a short account, is around Fredericton from the East Coast. And this is just a short statement that I'll read really quickly. We are Demand the Stars, a queer anti-fascist collective on unceded Wool Astogwe land in Ekfanok, also known as Fredericton. Some of us were involved in the Pride Committee, the Fredericton Pride Board. In addition, some of us are active with Fredericton Palestine Solidarity. Fredericton Palestine Solidarity was founded when Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006. Since October 7th, 2023, many queer folks have been active with Fredericton Palestine Solidarity and also with independent Jewish voices in New Brunswick. We organize panels and other educational work to support Palestine and Palestinians with a focus on queers in Palestine and the diaspora. On June 26, 2024, the Fredericton Pride Board declared its solidarity with Palestine and Palestinians and announced that the FPS, Palestine Solidarity Group, would be Grand Marshals of the 2024 parade, and that it would reject sponsorships and parade applications from businesses listed on the Canadian BDS site. A predictable backlash followed, with local Zionists launching a petition asking City Council to rescind that parade permit. Most of the signatories were from outside New Brunswick. We launched a counter petition in support of FPS as Grand Marshals. The counter petition garnered a large number of signatures, mostly from New Brunswick. Independent Jewish voices in New Brunswick also wrote in support. The 2024 Pride Parade went on as planned, despite the Zionist opposition. However, an unrelated issue led to a great deal of stress and instability for the Fredericton Pride organization. Fredericton Pride is currently engaged in rebuilding, and Demand the Stars is planning anti-colonial, anti-genocide pride events. So we've now heard from the groups that organized opposition within, especially on the East Coast, to corporate sponsorship and genocide sponsorship for Pride. And we're now moving to talk to people from Sudbury. Alicia is unfortunately unable to attend the event tonight, but Aspen from Sudbury Pride will be able to participate. Aspen Groom is a dedicated advocate, educator, and aspiring artist based in Northern Ontario. Professionally, they work as a sexual health educator with a focus on supporting 2S LGBTQ plus people. Outside of work, Aspen serves as chair of Sudbury Pride and as a director with the Northern Ontario Pride Connection. Aspen is committed to promoting the rights and well-being of 2S LGBTQ individuals and actively works to challenge systems inequalities. And Aspen will be telling us about what Sudbury Pride has done in relationship to the Palestinian struggle. Thank you, Aspen, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for being here. So I think one of the things that I want to acknowledge before, just of knowing that Sudbury, Ontario, the name in Anishinaabe is Enswakamok, which means where the three roads meet. And so I think it's really something interesting as we talk about this and we talk about some of the challenges that come with this, where like I have a privilege to sit on like sacred land. And so there's like holding that in space while we continue to talk about genocide of other people's sacred land. When we talk about the Palestine Solidarity Movement in Sudbury and for us, Sudbury Pride, I think there's a really important part that we have to talk about that you hear like eggs on of when we talk about, you know, Fredericton Pride and some of the stresses there and challenges that come up. But we, my engagement, and Alicia, who was planning to be here and is now sick, our engagement started from a time of the organization was falling apart for its umpteenth time in a number of years. And I think it's important to acknowledge that is where some of this, like the trying to gather the pieces back together is where some of this activism has come from, and some of this like standing with the groups that have continued to be marginalized. And so when I talk about that part, we go back to where that started. Sudbury Pride has a history of being very, very white, of being, whether we would like to hold it in space or not, actively racist. And so over the last 2 years, in both 2023 and 2024, there were instances where they were working alongside police in a very active way. And fortunately, like, community spoke out, and particularly racialized, marginalized people spoke out and said this isn't okay. And so in both of those years, so this past summer, our Pride Festival is in July, and the year previous, folks spoke out, and then there was a very complicated internal struggle that resulted in the resignation of the majority of the board. So in the end of May at last year, actually our whole 8 out of 9 members of the board resigned. And so I say that because my engagement with the board and several people's engagement with our current board started in June, which, as you can imagine, a month before the Pride Festival is not the time to plan Pride events. And so I bring that in because when we came on, the goal was, one, we need to figure out what is going on and what has been done, what hasn't been done. And also we need to stand for something, because right now all we're standing for is, you know, being a bunch of like poorly behaving like white supremacists. And so part of that agreement was a handful of us who have joined have been involved in activism in other ways, and had said that we need to say that, like, we need to do the right thing with this, and we need to do the right thing with our funding. And so before our Pride celebrations in July, the decision was a very easy one, and I think that that's something that I hear from other organizations as being much more of a struggle. But our decision was, it's the right thing to do, and we'll release a statement and we'll stand by that. We'll adjust who we're buying from and all of our things of what we can do right now, recognizing that as an organization, the turmoil was very real and very mismanaged, and there was a lot of other pieces going on there. And so we started with that, and then we started changing some of our internal policies in trying our best to align with the BDS list at that time. We were really fortunate in that some of our connections through Palestine Solidarity Sudbury, we were approached to join and sign the Pledge of Solidarity, which, again, similarly, for the folks who have been in this rebuilding phase, those conversations were not hard conversations. They were simply, we know that that's the right thing to do, and if it goes badly, then so be it. We'll figure that out. That's our responsibility as people who are, you know, people with privilege and power, is that we can deal with that as it falls out. And I think, fortunately, we've seen a much milder form of what we've seen in other places, where most of the I think the fears of being called things like being told having power or money withdrawn, or being called anti-Semitic, or one of the only statements that we really received was the idea of, like, we're not protecting, or we're not standing for all to us LGBTQ folks, which felt highly ironic and confusing all at the same time. But for us, it's just been a question of, you know, if we are a predominantly white organization that is looking to do better, and is looking to do better in a lot of, in like supporting the people in our community who make up our community, that was where we landed. And then we were like, we'll deal with the backlash, and it might suck for a little bit, but it's not. And it's what we have seen as a result has been overwhelmingly unifying, which I think other folks have also experienced. Kind of our direction as an organization has changed dramatically since June of last year. Our focus has really adjusted to saying we are for community, and so we have a responsibility to community that just isn't throwing a party that's funded by banks. And so what we've seen is, I made the joke earlier today of, we're kind of going back to what Pride has always been about, which is that we're looking to build community connections and offer each other mutual support. And so this movement, which still exists as an underlying theme of everything that we have to do in terms of who we're supporting and how we're navigating our lives, and how we're navigating as an organization, has really been more focusing on, like, how do we offer support to organizations that are already doing this work, that might not have the same access to community grants or knowledgeable people on getting sorts of like funds like that, or social support in other ways, but where we can do the background labor and just show up in a good way. And that involves things like co-hosting free events that are decided by community, and saying, well, maybe we don't want to put that labor on you, but can we make things happen that others already want or are already trying to make and just like can't necessarily get it because of other limitations. Or a big one is getting anti-oppression and anti-racism training and training on how we can actually keep each other safe. Because though a lot of folks in community might know that we need to keep each other safe, because we're certainly not getting that safety from, you know, like our communities are not particularly safe for queer and trans people, especially queer and trans people of color. Saying, how do we learn how to do that so we can do it in a good way? And so it's been it's much more of that community support as opposed to just continuing to be like, you know, having a lot of money then can basically throw a big party that doesn't mean anything and that it really doesn't support and actually actively excludes a lot of our community members. So I think it's a fascinating turnaround of, you know, where things have started to get better, and largely because we are changing our behavior and we're changing what we're saying and we're changing like how we want to actually meaningfully engage. So I think I look to the future and I'm hopeful. We'll see what this Pride Festival coming up actually involves and how that looks different. I can say I think it'll be a lot better. But it's been an interesting turning, especially involved how we've been like working alongside the Palestine Solidarity Movement. So thanks.
Thanks, Aspen. I just wanted to make one comment. I'm so pleased that what we actually initiated when I was in Sudbury in 1997, which was the Sudbury Pride Committee, has actually managed to produce, even though there's been many struggles, and Black Lives Matter has been part of those struggles, and a whole bunch of other organizations have been, that there has actually been such progress, and also that Fierté Sudbury Pride is also supporting the PSP campaign. So thank you very much. And then, May, you're going to do the next introduction.
Yes, thank you. And just to add thank you for that. And just to add, you know, really wanted to thank Aspen for that important articulation of the connections between the struggle for Palestinian liberation, but also the work that has to be done by prides across Turtle Island with respect to racism and settler colonialism right here. And so really appreciated you making those connections. And, you know, I think all of us that do this work, I think, are indebted to the Black and Indigenous queer folks that have been at the forefront of struggling to create prides that are not complicit in racism and police violence, settler colonialism. So thank you again for that. Gary?
Yes, we're moving sort of into another area where struggle has taken place, and this is the Ottawa area and what happened with Capital Pride and what it was much broader than that next year. I'm going to be introducing Masha and Menashe to talk about these experiences, and I'll just say a few things to introduce them, and then they will tell us about some of what's been going on in Ottawa, where a whole bunch of different state, corporate, and professional organizations withdrew from Capital Pride because of its one line in a statement of support for Palestine that said that BDS would be used in the future as a criteria for funding. Anyway, so we've got two people speaking to us. Masha Davidovich is an Ottawa-based organizer and activist. She is a supporter of Queers for Palestine and organizes with Labor for Palestine, as well as in her union, the Canadian Association of Professional Employees. Masha is passionate about putting labor power and labor organizing methods to work in advancing Palestine solidarity, queer and trans struggles, and all our interconnected forms of liberation. And then we've also got Manesha Spivak Sladowski. I hope I pronounced the name all right. And it's they and them is the gender designation, is a trans non-binary white settler living on stolen Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. They were raised in so-called Ottawa in a Jewish family who up until last year would attend their local Pride parade with their synagogue in support of themselves and other queer people they love. Menashe is with Queers for Palestine Ottawa, who were in contact with Capital Pride leading up to last year's parade date, requesting that they make some changes in their sponsor and operational structure to follow the PACB, that's the Palestine Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel guidelines. They care deeply about equity work, which means they are always learning how to maintain and repair relationships after making mistakes. Community work is hard, and they look forward to hearing and learning from others about how they are doing and how we can support each other in keeping this momentum alive. So I'd now like to introduce Menashe and Masha. So I don't know if there's a particular order you want to go in, but go for it.
Thanks so much, Gary. I'll chat first and then Masha will go after. Not because their name sounds like the second half of my name. Thank you so much for having me. I didn't have this in my notes, but after listening to everybody talk, I realized how much I needed this. It's not even really connection. I'm not physically with anyone, but yeah, things are very heavy today, and many other days, and it's having community means a lot, and I think that's what all of this is about, is that we don't just choose communities that are easy, that it makes it's hard to build relationships that last through conflict, and I think that's what people in Ottawa are learning, is that when we get at each other's throats, there's bigger things in mind. And so I just have a few notes about how things went in Ottawa. At least from what I know there were so many other people that wrote to Capital Pride, that had conversations with board members or the ED of Capital Pride. I know there's so many people that had conversations with their employers before and after the news of them pulling out of Pride. And so I would love to eventually meet everyone who took part in this. But I do know that there were a lot of people from all angles of this. And so I think that's what I'm most grateful for in Ottawa. Yeah, and just a clarification that yeah, up until last year, my family would come to Pride in support of me. And because of Capital Pride's statement saying that they stand in solidarity with queers in Palestine and the Palestinian people, they are no longer coming, which I think is something that a lot of people can relate to, and some of that stems from a misunderstanding about the words of boycott. And Masha can definitely touch on that, and maybe go to Mama Ganusha's website to learn more about that. But yeah, in Ottawa, I mean, Queers for Palestine heard from somebody that they weren't sure how things were going to play out, and so I asked Capital Pride if there would be any problems with us having a float and having flags, and they said, as a matter of fact, they waived our fee because they were, grateful for some of the work that we'd been doing in the community. We had no pushback from them, so that was great. I think that the statement fell short from a lot of the demands, but it was definitely a start, and all of the work that I think came from Capital Pride came afterwards. They had a media storm that they dealt with, kept showing up at things like school board meetings, just to keep working on those relationships. And I think that one of the most beautiful things that came out of this is everybody who came to Pride, despite their employers pulling out, all just marched together. And then we had people from the sidelines that just hopped in the march and came together. I think that one of the most important things that communities need to do when they're pushing for boycotts is work collaboratively with the people that they're asking to divest. Say like, we're behind you, so let's rally the troops. Let's get everybody to say that they're still going to sign up for Pride and come out regardless of this or that. And so still a lot of work to be done. I think that's my 3 minutes. So I'll pass it over to Masha.
Yeah, thanks so much, Menashe, and thanks to the PSP campaign for constituting this space for us to really exchange these experiences and lessons learned. I think it's really, really important. So I'll try to be quick. Compared to a lot of other cities of our size or larger where Pride boards didn't budge and ended up facing those external disruptions or protests, Ottawa probably saw the biggest pro-Palestine Pride in Canada. It was pro-Palestine in pretty meaningful ways. There was that statement that came out a couple weeks ahead of the week that kind of acknowledged both the genocide and made the overture towards BDS. There were Palestine colors on display throughout the week, including at the march. And there was very significant backlash from Zionists and their allies, as was mentioned, including a lot of Ottawa's leading holders of political and economic power, government, major corporations, public sector employers. And that backlash really drew clear lines of demarcation and settled some of the community debates about whether the steps Capital Pride had taken were adequate or not. Because even if they were insufficient, they framed a defensive fight that was strategic for us. It was clearly a precondition to future and more substantive steps toward BDS compliance and a Pride that's actually apartheid-free and genocide-free. So I just want to acknowledge that limit, that the strategic organizing work of making that a reality still lies ahead of us, as it does in most or all cities of our size or larger. So I want to just talk about two important kind of takeaways or lessons from the experience of Capital Pride that might be taken back to other contexts. And the first, from how things kind of unfolded in Ottawa in the public eye, is that we don't want our prides to quietly divest. We actually want them to divest in a way that's visible and unapologetic, and that builds up our community's capacity and political awareness and sharpens our sense of our values, allies, and enemies. So for our communities, the backlash that we faced, answered by solidarity, was really political education in practice. So what I mean by that is, in response to this Palestine statement, corporate and political power overwhelmingly pulled out. It launched this aggressive smear and boycott media campaign to try to force a retraction. And this was actually very politicizing and unifying for our community. And it taught a lot of people a few really important things. And the first is that support from institutional power is super conditional, right? Like one political statement, one expression of Pride being political in a way that didn't align with the interests of power was enough to bring on that withdrawal of support from our communities at a time of existential threats. So this taught a lot of people we can't count on them, we can't bank on them, and raised questions about why their presence or non-attendance is even a focus or something that deserves to chime in on what should or shouldn't happen at Pride. And it also created that organic and felt linkage between the negation of Palestinian humanity and that kind of condescension and contempt towards our communities. A lot of us kind of heard, if you stand with Palestinians, we no longer stand with you. So that's an education in practice, right? On that core queer liberationist concept. No one is free until everyone is free. Pride is a protest. Pride is political. And the second, I'll try to be really quick, is just that Pride, even at Ottawa's scale, was still a huge success. The boycott failed, community was unified and turned out in force. Employers pulled out, the workers and in some cases unions showed up in force in a context where each person attending was actually refuting that Zionist premise that this was an unsafe Pride that should be avoided. So the case, I think, can be pointed to in other big cities to undercut that kind of familiar bad faith argument and rhetoric about how supporting Palestine will ruin the week, the community won't support it, sponsors will pull out, everything will collapse. The experience shows absolutely to the contrary. It was a party, it was a celebration, it was also a mass display of Palestine solidarity. We had the rainbow flags, and we also had the Palestine flags and the keffiyehs. So it's really important. It's the biggest event of the year. It brings together our community to self-define and to educate, and it's a huge showcase externally to our actual and potential allies about who and what we are and what our politics are. So I think it's a really big deal. I really hope to see us deepen it and to see more of that in other cities as well.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. I think I'll be introducing the next speaker. Gary, you and I are both in the spotlight. So yeah, thank you again for speaking to that. And I really liked the lessons learned aspect of what you were talking about. I think those are really important. So thank you both. Our next speaker is Javier Davila, who's a queer Latinx educator, facilitator, and community organizer based in Tecatondo. He has been involved in Palestine solidarity movements for over 2 decades, and recently in collective efforts to urge Pride Toronto to adopt the liberatory demand from queers in Palestine, to align with BDS, and to reject corporate sponsors complicit in colonial violence and genocide. His community work focuses on addressing sexual and gender-based violence alongside Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other racialized men and non-binary people through approaches rooted in transformative justice, abolition, collective care, and the belief that no one is disposable. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Just really want to thank the organizers and the speakers and everyone for being here, because this matters. Right now, institutions that claim to care for our communities, pride organizations, school boards, healthcare systems, are not just protecting their own power, but actively siding with it and criminalizing dissent, suppressing solidarity with Palestine, and using the language of neutrality, bureaucracy, and deflection to avoid accountability. I've been reflecting a lot on what I want to say today, and I don't have much time, but not just the facts, which I'll get to in a moment, but the feeling of it, what it's been like to engage with Pride Toronto over the past nearly 20 years, not nearly as long as Gary has, but especially this last year, what it's been like to keep showing up even as they refuse to listen, what it's been like to watch them avoid transparency and accountability, what it's been like to keep trying. And I think a part of me is still holding on to something, and it might be the memory of 2010, when Toronto's queer and trans communities came together to overturn Pride Toronto's ban on queers against Israeli apartheid. And that victory wasn't just about overturning the ban itself. It was about cross-solidarity of various political segments, for lack of a better term, in our communities. And I might be romanticizing this a little bit. I tend to do that. But it was near my first involvement in the actual Pride Parade with Queers Against Israeli Apartheid the year before. Some were fighting for freedom of expression, others under the banner, Whose Pride, Our Pride, others wearing over their face tape that said, My Pride is Political. And of course, those of us who recognize that Palestinian liberation is inextricably linked to queer liberation and anti-colonial struggle. Now, fast forward to November 2023, Queers in Palestine, a group of queer Palestinians, workers, students, farmers, parents, issued this global call for action. If you're unfamiliar with it, just Google liberatory demand, Queers in Palestine. And a very brief summary of the demand asks for queer and feminist groups to move beyond sharing statements and signing letters and take active engagement with decolonial and liberatory struggles in Palestine and around the globe. Over 550 queer and trans organizations signed on. So Gary and I, as Pride Toronto members at the time, submitted a proposal to adopt and enact the liberatory demand, which included adopting the global BDS campaign. We did this multiple times at their town hall in November 23, board of directors Q&A in January 2024, in email ahead of the 2024 AGM. So this is over 1 year ago. And again, at that AGM itself, where it was officially recorded in the minutes and sent as an official proposal immediately afterwards. I'm naming these particular dates and processes not because I believe the structures that govern Pride Toronto, the Not-for-Profit Act, existing corporate sponsorship guidelines, institutional policies, bylaws, legislations, can ever really truly be liberatory. They exist to manage dissent, not enable it. And yet I've chosen to engage with these mechanisms selectively and hopefully strategically, sometimes at great cost, knowing that within these constraints, they might advance our work. I still don't know if that's true, but these mechanisms and legal avenues which I felt necessary to engage with within specific contexts, have also distanced me from my body and isolated me from more relational work. So I just wanted to name that. Under the Not-for-Profit Act, when a proposal like this is submitted, the board is legally required to provide notice to members and place it on the next agenda for discussion. Alternatively, they have 10 days to issue a notice of refusal with reasons. Pride Toronto did neither. Instead, they ignored it. So in March 2024, 19 current members, along with 8 former members, 64 community activists, multiple queer organizations, including Jews Say No to Genocide, Queer Muslim Network, Queer Ontario, No Pride in Policing Coalition, Surge Toronto, and Queers for Palestine, formally demanded that Pride Toronto hold a special general meeting to address the proposal. Their response? Silence. So we pressed further, and they refused that right to hold this meeting. Gary, the last member of Pride Toronto, was a founding member of the Lesbian and Gay Pride Day Committee in '81, publicly resigned. I encourage folks to look that up. If you just Google Gary Kinsman Pride resignation letter. But that wasn't it. Just days before Pride 2024, Gary and I, who had put forward this proposal, along with community members and community organizations and other members, were contacted by Toronto Police. We were told they wanted to have a conversation to ensure our safety. The police specifically mentioned their track record of maintaining neutrality on protests related to Israel-Palestine, and they wanted to ensure our safety at Pride. Why did the police have our personal emails? Why were Gary and I singled out and targeted in this way? For me, this raises serious questions about who Pride Toronto is accountable to and why we were targeted in this way. So this utilizing of state and police, the silence, the avoidance, it's not an accident. It's a strategy. It's a strategy meant to exhaust, demobilize, intimidate, and create this illusion of accountability to our communities and queer liberation while siding with power in the most deliberate way. In the past couple of years, we've called out Pride Toronto's choice of accounting firm, which had executives sitting on the board of the Jewish National Fund, an organization so deeply complicit in land theft that it finally had its charitable status revoked by the CRA in 2024. More recently, we've discovered their official law firm, which is a law firm which exchanges its legal services for official partnership status, is a staunch supporter of Israel, having issued public statements in support. But this same law firm worked against Palestinian solidarity organizing by representing McGill University and filing for an injunction to shut down the student encampment. So these are not neutral affiliations. They shape Pride Toronto's decisions, silences, and refusals. But if there's one thing that I've learned, collective resistance, direct action, cross-solidarity among various segments of political difference within our communities works. In 2008, we fought against Pride Toronto honoring the Canadian Armed Forces as best representative of the queer and trans community. While they moved forward with this decision, the organizing itself was a refusal to accept militarism as liberation. In 2010, I spoke about the overturning of the ban Israeli apartheid. From 2010 to 2014, governments at every level threatened to strip Pride's funding of Quiet March, yet we marched because our movements have never been contingent on state approval. And of course, everyone's familiar with 2016 Black Lives Matter, stopping the parade to demand, among other things, the removal of police, which Pride tried to walk back. But this pivotal action reshaped the narrative of what's possible. None of this happened because Pride Toronto acted in good faith. It happened because of collective mobilization, political education, direct action, and solidarity that cuts across struggles and strategies. And I think this is what we have to hold on to now. So where do we go from here? Well, ahead of the most recent, so just last month, January 2025 AGM, I reminded Pride Toronto of their legal obligation to put our proposal on the agenda. They ignored it. It was not on the agenda. After the AGM passed, they responded saying they'll follow up by the end of the week. That was weeks ago. They've said nothing. But silence doesn't end a movement. I just want to call out, as we speak right now, or maybe a little bit ago, educators and parents are outside of the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. These are my colleagues. This is a fund worth over $250 billion, and they're holding a vigil for the Students and Teachers Guild in Gaza and demanding divestment from companies complicit in genocide and profiting from Palestinian deaths, such as Honeywell, Northrop Grumman, and Textron. In 2009, Pride Toronto's slogan was "Can't Stop, Won't Stop." Ironically, while Pride co-opts the language of resistance, it's our communities through collective action and accountability to each other that give it meaning. So they may suppress participation, they may ignore proposals, members, and the larger community, but they won't stop this movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javier, for that. And obviously, our experiences overlapped in a lot of ways, and I'm so glad that you were able to bring a lot of that into the context for today. We're now going to hear from the Coalition Against Pinkwashing and Faisal and Bianca from it. I'm a little bit concerned about time, so I'm not sure I'm going to read the full bios for both speakers. But what we're trying to do here is to look at the actual direct action resistance that took place last year against the limitations of Pride Toronto. So I thought what I'd do is I'll read the description of the Coalition Against Pinkwashing and then just a little bit about your two bios. So the Coalition Against Pinkwashing, CAP, is a coalition of queer and trans members from various Palestine solidarity groups across Toronto. CAP resists pinkwashing attempts by organizations such as Pride Toronto that launder the images of governments and corporations complicit in genocide. CAP organized a demonstration against Pride Toronto and the complicit sponsors and parade participants that were platformed during the 2024 Pride Toronto Parade. And both Faisal and Bianca will be talking about that. Bianca is a certified lover girl who's been engaged in organizing and community support since 2014, contributing through direct action, mutual aid, fundraising, and advocacy. She played a key role in the Coalition Against Pinkwashing's disruption of Pride Toronto's parade in 2014, putting a spotlight on Pride Toronto's pinkwashing and demanding they sever ties with corporate sponsors complicit in the Palestinian genocide. Faisal is an organizer with Queers for Palestine, Toronto, World Beyond War, and the Coalition Against Pinkwashing. Throughout the last year, he has been involved in organizing and participating in various demonstrations and community events for Palestine and related struggles. Faisal is not the, I won't read that. Faisal says he's not the greatest fan of public speaking, but he's driven by the urgency of the situation in Palestine, its spillover into Lebanon, and its connections to oppressions we have seen throughout the world. So I think with that, I will introduce Bianca and Faisal and the Coalition Against Pinkwashing to talk about your experiences last year and your plans for this year.
Thank you very much, Gary. And because we're keeners, we prepared slides. Maybe a little dorky, but here we go. All right, thanks again for that great intro, Gary. And so we're going to be talking about Pride TO and their affiliates' complicity in pinkwashing genocide. Take it away.
Yeah. So thank you also to Javier for giving so much information about what was happening internally. We do touch on that a little bit here because that was a part of what led to having to take this action in 2024. So leading up to the Toronto Pride Parade on June 30th, Pride TO remained complicit in pinkwashing global oppression. activists, including some from as well as longtime members of Pride TO, Javier and Gary as well, engaged with Pride Toronto's leadership for months, as mentioned, before the parade, demanding concrete action. So some of those demands, which we'll touch on, just removing corporate sponsors that are complicit in genocide and apartheid, holding a general membership meeting to allow queer and trans community to discuss Palestine solidarity and to take a public stand against Israel's occupation of Palestinian land. As Javier mentioned, Pride TO ignored all of these demands, which led us really with no choice but to disrupt the parade. Our goal was really to hold Pride Toronto accountable for betraying the very values that it claims to uphold. As Javier explained as well, using that language, it's been really demoralizing and disgusting to see that and to see them continue to not engage.
Yeah, so here are just a few pictures. This is the benefit of slides, everyone. You get to see some pictures from the actual disruption. So yeah, our slogan was Pride Partners with Genocide, and on the banner we had sort of listed some of the most complicit actors, ranging from the big banks, Google, Amazon, Microsoft should have made it there. You got the U.S. Consulate and CIJA, which is the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, some of the biggest propagandists on the scene. We made 4 banners. On the top right, you can see the sort of how the structure of the protest was. The front banner says Pride Partners with Genocide. We had no pride in apartheid, no pride in genocide, and in the back we had a banner that said Stop Pinkwashing. Yeah, so I'll go over these briefly. I think everyone here is pretty, informed on sort of how these corporations are complicit. But Google and Amazon have a massive $1.2 billion project in cloud computing, with that goes directly to support Israeli military operations. Microsoft also not only has heavy investment in cloud infrastructure for Israeli military operations, they even have units embedded. They even have employees embedded within Israeli military units, and so making them directly complicit in war crimes. The big banks, they're not only invested in weapons manufacturers, they're also invested in pipeline projects that go through Wet'suwet'en territory and violating unceded it's unceded territory, not in consultation with Indigenous leaders, multiple violations for Indigenous people both here on Turtle Island, from Turtle Island to Palestine. And so that's just capitalism for you. I mentioned the big banks, all are complicit in these investments. They are also, so Scotiabank in particular, TD as well, they have investments in Elbit Systems, which is the largest Israeli weapons company. And I mentioned CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. They've been guilty of spreading beheaded baby propaganda. I witnessed it myself in Mississauga City Hall. Mass rape allegations, all of which have been debunked. They also actively suppress activists. And then, of course, you have the U.S. Consulate, which over the past year has sent more than $20 billion in terms of military aid in the form of bunker busting, bombs, and, the rest, white phosphorus, what have you. All of which is being deployed against the Palestinian population. So this is outrageous stuff. And the fact that Pride Toronto does not want to do anything about it, does not even want to have conversations with its members about it, should, I think, enrage all of us. So following our disruption, and I before I get into that, I do want to say a big thank you to Javier and Gary as well for doing the seemingly thankless work of pushing Pride Toronto on demands, and Queers for Palestine as well through their efforts put out a statement as well. And when those went ignored, then we felt that there was Pride Toronto left us with no choice but to disrupt the parade and to make a statement that we will not stand for these war criminals and propagandists marching in our parade in our name. We did the disruption. Kojo Modeste, the executive director of Pride Toronto, came up to us, and we demanded that they sign on to our demands. They refused to engage with them. They refused to have a conversation, and they said they would offer us a meeting. We told them the time to meet was 7 months ago when your members have been demanding it, and we would not budge until they signed on to the parade. Now, following that, so my advice here is obviously be prepared with a media on at least the following day after you do such a disruption, because there was a lot of disinformation that was being spread around. I mean, obviously, so they failed to take responsibility for their own neglect and for failing to engage their own members in conversation when those demands were being actively raised. And instead they blamed us, and they, used this liberal language of this is not the way, and engage in dialogue. They did with one of the news outlets say that they were more than happy to have an open discussion with us. They did not deliver. There was a back and forth, and they proposed closed door meetings. They wanted intermediation, and our position was, you haven't even had a conversation with us yet, and you're already going towards mediation. Now, we are maintaining ongoing discussions with some key stakeholders outside of Pride Toronto, and we're continuing to advocate to, hopefully divest our efforts. So I want to say, Gary and Javier, your efforts are not in vain, and we appreciate your efforts on that.
Yeah. So all of that kind of brings us to where we are today. And there have been some developments that are very concerning. The most recent one being that Pride TO ushered in a board member employed by the Ministry of the Attorney General, which has been actively involved in suppressing pro-Palestinian activism. And they have a long track record of anti-Palestinian racism. A couple things to note here is implementing discriminatory policies that screen law students for pro-Palestine views. Encouraging harsher charges against activists through the Secretive Hate Crimes Working Group, which collaborates with Toronto Police and their Project Resolute, and to criminalize pro-Palestine advocacy. This has been reported by news outlets such as The Breach. They've also allowed tax breaks for organizations complicit in Israel's illegal occupation and genocide. So their decision, Pride TO's decision to align with the province's prosecution office, is not just a betrayal of its own membership, but it's really in direct conflict with queer liberation, and something that we should all be deeply concerned about, especially as they've tried to walk back, having police and Pride and all that people that, that Black Lives Matter has fought for, and folks have fought for previous to this. And we know firsthand that state repression disproportionately targets queer, trans, and BIPOC communities, and we really must resist any attempt to integrate our spaces with carceral and colonial institutions.
Okay, I'm going to breeze through these because I know we are running short on time. But I think most folks again here are quite informed. You have major human rights organizations, documenting and calling Israel's actions genocide formally. They're formally accused of genocide. You have the warrants by the highest court, international court, issuing warrants for the war crimes of the Israeli leaders. And Pride TO, again, in this context, is refusing to take a material stance. Right, and I should really mention that now the ethnic cleansing has spread to the West Bank as well. It has been ongoing, but it's accelerated there as well. So, we know Pride is born out of libertarian values. And we just want to reiterate that, of course, all Pride organizations need to stick true to them and commit to PACB, which is the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, and BDS principles. And they also need to stand against carceral institutions and police and state repression. And hiring, having a board member that is directly implicated in this is not an encouraging stance.
Yeah. So just take it down a notch, because we're trying to breeze through that pretty quickly so we could stay on time a little bit here. I think really to the wider audience and folks that are tuning in today, we're just really asking, and we want to reiterate what everybody has said here, that to get involved. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for anybody to tap you on the shoulder. It's up to us to really demand accountability, to organize locally, to form affinity groups and build strong community. We know as queers that community is everything. Queer joy is everything, and queer resistance is our history. And we really want to say that, you know, if your pride is not going to divest, if your pride is standing for this, then boycott it. We know that everybody has the right to celebrate. We know how good it feels to be in queer community with one another. But this is so much bigger than that. And even if that's the one thing that you can do, and redirect to the core roots, the grassroots of what Pride started as, then please do that. And we hope that the information today will encourage folks to do that this year.
Thank you.
Hi, so thank you so much, Bianca and Faisal, for that discussion. And obviously that opens up a whole bunch of questions about what we're going to be seeing over the next number of months. I also just should mention that another thing that happened last year was at the same time as the disruption took place, there was also a major abolitionist pride mobilization, which was also about pro-Palestine solidarity, and it attracted about 2,500 people, so that we actually had numerous demonstrations taking place that were actually in support of the Palestinian struggle. So we're now at the very end of the discussion, and we have announcements to make, and we could have some questions coming in, although I'm concerned a bit about how late it is. It's already 8:40, and we really wanted to try to end the event around 8:30 if possible. So I'm not quite sure how to proceed. There does not seem to be any clear questions.
There's one question, Gary,
Okay.
and maybe if we can have max one or two panelists volunteer to answer it, and just very quickly. And I just a note before I get to the question, there was also kind of a logistic question around whether there would be a recording. The folks, and I should say shout out and thank you so much for the folks working behind the scenes. You can't see them on screen, but without them, this panel couldn't have been possible. To the tech folks working very hard to bring you this live stream and this panel. We are working on having a recording or at least clips available, but stay tuned for more information on that. But thank you again. Shout out to the tech folks. The question is, our community's only queer event is facing a critical challenge. Without TD, we can't keep it running. The event is a lifeline for many queer folks, and we're desperate for ways to sustain it. Can you help connect with resources or offer guidance on how to keep this vital space alive? So again, if I could just have one or two folks very quickly respond to that. Eddie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So this is something that we recognize too, is that we're a small place and we need something has to fund these things. And what we're really trying to ground ourselves in is the fact that we're 50 years into this game, if we're using Stonewall as a marker. So we have doctors and lawyers and politicians and deputy ministers and people who make money, where it's not like it's in 1992 when we still had the fruit machine and the federal government trying to find us. And we're trying to put that back on those people. And we're creating what we're calling a patron program, where we haven't figured out the dollar amount yet, but we're trying to give people an opportunity and putting the call out to our local community to say, we have to fund this ourselves. And whether it's in $200 increments or whatever that amount is try to break down what your cost is and look at how many people would I need to find to do this. And that's something we're looking to launch in the next couple of weeks. But especially last year when partners pulled out, we saw an outpour of community members that said, no, I'll sign a check. If that's what it takes, I'll sign a check to keep this going. And put it on your community and make sure that they know. I mean, in places like this, and if TD is going to collapse your your festival, I'm going to assume it's volunteers that are putting together your work. So put it back to the community to say, we need this, and we need you to help us put this off. We can't take this for granted anymore. That's the approach we're taking. And this time next year, we'll report back and let you know how it went.
Thank you. And Menashe, I see your hand up again, just 30-second, and then I'll pass it over to Gary for some announcements. Thank you.
Sure thing. I would look at the PACB website. They have resources on sustainable boycott, divestment, sanctions movements. In realizing that there are queer people that work at places like TD, and we don't want to ostracize people. They might not be able to quit their only job, only source of income. So when people are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, but they want to do something, and their employer, their only source of income, is stopping them, I would suggest, making small sustainable steps. And PACB has people that are experts in sustainable boycott. They do train the trainer events, and they'll work with organizations to make that happen. So there's probably someone in your city or nearby that can do that. And the other thing I would suggest is take note of all those crucial supports that you're speaking of, and go to the city and ask why the city isn't providing those crucial supports. Put a dollar to it, or put kind of like this is what happens if we don't have these resources, and it shouldn't. We know that we keep each other safe and that we protect each other, but we can also push back to the city and say, without this is what's going to happen, and that's on you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so what I see there just now from one of the tech people is there's one more question that came up, and I think I'll just raise it so that people can think about it. Is there a push in Toronto as part of the general campaign conversation with Pride Toronto to get other queer organizations to publicly denounce, stop working with Pride Toronto on any level? I'm not fully sure what that is, but maybe people could think about that, which is
I can
level of
offer a sentence on that, Gary.
go
I can
go
offer a
for it.
sentence. Short answer is yes, and it's both sort of Queers for Palestine and Coalition Against Pinkwashing, or both have efforts on that. So short answer.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I think we're sort of heading towards the end of this very exciting and very interesting and quite original and new set of conversations and dialogues that we've started today. In terms of Queers for Palestine and our BDS campaign around Pride, the PSP campaign, I think people should keep your eyes and ears open, because there will be more organizations coming out to support the PSP campaign in the near future, and that there will be clearly discussions that we need to go further with, that we initiated some aspects of those conversations today about, as Pride season comes up, how we can actually make sure that Pride and genocide is not central to what Pride is. Unfortunately, that is often the case. Jasper Poor and other people have actually pointed this out, that a lot of the funding and stuff actually means that there's a lot of white, Western, queer support for Pride and genocide. And instead, we need to make it absolutely clear that if we're actually talking about the lesbian and gay and queer liberation and trans liberation movements, we actually need to be highly committed to no Pride in genocide. So I'm not quite sure what else to raise at this point in time, except to say that this has been an amazing conversation, amazing set of dialogues that need to be continued in the future. And I'm just so glad that everyone was able to participate, and hopefully we'll be able to get this so that people who weren't able to attend or participate tonight will actually be able to listen to it in the future. And I think that I would also like to thank all of the tech people who people I think are aware of. But it's really important to note that we've had 4 or 5 tech people who have actually, both from Scholar Strike Canada and from Queers for Palestine Toronto, who have actually allowed this event to take place. Without them, it would not have been possible. So I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything. I was just wanting to thank everyone for coming and for participating, and everyone who helped to make this such a successful event, and an innovative and new event as well. And we hopefully will be able to continue some of these discussions in the future. So I think it's thanks so much, solidarity, and no pride in genocide, and support for BDS as central to all of our pride organizing. I think it's thank you then. And so I'm so glad to see all of you, and I hope you have a good rest of the evening, and that the struggle will continue, and let's hope that the struggles that continue are as successful as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all of those watching on the live stream. And let's keep this conversation going.